We don't know for sure how effective these systems, and there are, I think, if I remember correctly, around 3 for different categories of rockets. Iron Dome, there's the David Sling for the medium-range stuff, and the Arrow 2 for the ballistic missiles. They've apparently done well in tests, very expensive systems, but the thing is that when Hezbollah fires, let's say, 4,000... The rockets that Hezbollah fires into Israel, although they may cause greater destruction than they have done in the past with the bigger ones, it's still limited. It's still very small at the end of the day. The impact these rockets have is the disruption to the lives of the Israeli public. So when you've got rockets falling on your neighborhood, it doesn't matter if they're exploding 5 kilometers away, you still get in your car and you drive to the south. So by that token, if Hezbollah fires, say, 10,000 rockets into northern half of Israel in the next war, and Iron Dome, David Sling take out 80%, and you've still got 2,000 rockets falling into northern Israel, and if you're an Israeli in Kiryat Shimona or Haifa, you're not going to say, well, it's only 2,000 rockets falling on my head instead of 10,000, so I'm going to stay at home. You're still going to cause the same kind of level of disruption. So I'm not sure really how effective these kind of missile defense systems will be when it comes into a war situation.
Let's do 2 questions at a time.
I just have a question on the Scuds. Leslie Coburn from 60 Minutes. What credence do you give to these reports of the Scuds? Where is that intelligence coming from? How good is it?
Second question.
Since Israel presumably has nuclear weapons, do you think the dire situation and its imminence, as you describe it, might cause Israel to simultaneously take out the Iranian nuclear sites and simultaneously use its own nuclear capability to take out the Lebanese sites?
I certainly hope not. No, I don't think so.
Why else is it keeping
I can't
these
speak
nukes?
for what the Israelis are planning with their nuclear arsenal, but if they plan to fire nuclear missiles into Beirut, I hope they give us all plenty of warning so we can get out first. But I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, the nuclear weapons are a means of deterrence. Sometimes it has the opposite effect, perhaps, and we're seeing in Iran now that because the Israelis have got nuclear weapons, well, hell, we better get nuclear weapons as well. But then you have the kind of the Cold War scenario played out in the Middle East. But Scuds, yes, the Lebanese media treated the Scud story as basically the Israelis stoking things up. I was following this issue before the story was broken in the beginning of April, I believe. I was hearing these rumors. As far as I'm aware, I mean, the Americans and the Israelis both have their separate channels of intelligence. There's a lot of cooperation, of course. But as my understanding is that the intelligence that lies at the heart of the Scud story comes from the Americans and not the Israelis. Now, as I understand it, when this story did break, and there were some kind of confused reactions from the State Department, from U.S. officials, and there were leaks, anonymous sources saying, we know they've gone across the border. Others were saying, well, they may not have gone across the border, but they may be in Hezbollah's hands. It's kind of hard to... I mean, the way I see it is that the Hezbollah guys have been trained on the systems in Syria. They may be looking after some of them in Syria. I'm told that one branch of Israeli intelligence believes that a small number of these rockets has crossed the border into Lebanon. I'm told that the U.S. has no evidence of that, so they can't comment one way or the other. But the way that I look at it, I mean, obviously I don't get access to these kind of intelligence stuff. So if you look at it from the point of view of logic, I mean, why would Hezbollah want Scud rockets? Okay, well, we know that they want larger rockets with increased range and increased accuracy, which the Scud has. We don't know how much, because as I was saying earlier, the Syrian Scud is a copy of the North Korean version of the Russian original. It's very hard to know what kind of tinkering has gone on in between. The Russian original Scud, for instance, which is around, I think it's around 40 feet long, something like this, 12, 13 meters. It can't be broken down into separate components. But there's a possibility that the North Korean version, and maybe the Syrian version can, that you can break this huge rocket into maybe 3 components, which will obviously make it easier to smuggle across one of the most closely watched borders in the world. But apart from the difficulties in smuggling the rockets, you also need to smuggle across the transporter erector launcher, which is a dedicated vehicle for launching these things. And that's bigger than the rocket. And maybe there are ways of doing it, I don't know. But then you have to look at the logistics of firing these things. These are liquid-fueled rockets. It takes time, 45 minutes, maybe more, maybe a little less, to fuel up one of these rockets. The fuel itself is extremely hazardous stuff. It's not like ordinary gasoline you put in our cars. And where do you hide these things? Hezbollah dug a lot of bunkers and tunnels all over the place, possibly to the size that you can drive vehicles in. The Syrians have this, that they have these vehicle-sized tunnels. The idea being that you drive your Scud launcher out of the tunnel, you fire them, and bring it back in. Maybe Hezbollah has been able to do something like that, but it'd be very difficult. There's a big difference between constructing those kind of bunkers, which are for personnel only and secret and not being spotted, to building, a bunker where you can have the entrance as big as this wall. So for me, I'm keeping a sort of an open mind about it. I can see the rationale of why Hezbollah would want Scuds because of the range, because of the accuracy, because it would allow them to hit Dimona in southern Israel if they so wished. But I do have a question mark over the logistics of this and whether, if I was Hezbollah's armaments procurement officer, I would be inclined to think, well, thanks for the offer, but we'll stick with the M600s. But maybe Hezbollah thinks differently, I don't know.
Okay, we'll take 2 questions. This man.
I'm Sam Lewis. You made a suggestion the only real positive thing you could see the U.S. could do was somehow make a deal with Iran and change the game plan for the region. What about Syria? Would getting Syria into a serious negotiation with Israel over the Golan, would that have an effect on the future prospects for this awful war that's being described?
Yeah, it would. It seems from the perspective of Beirut at the moment that a peace between, a meaningful peace negotiations between the Syrians and the Israelis seem to be as far away as ever. President Assad has said that, how can we have peace with a government led by Netanyahu with Lieberman as the foreign minister? There's this constant debate about can Syria be pulled away from Iran. My understanding is that, I don't know the answer to that, first of all, but my understanding is that the Obama administration is really having a bit of a headache at the moment with the Syrians, as well as with the Israelis, but particularly with the Syrians over this issue of arming Hezbollah. And I'm told that the Syrian leadership denies categorically that it's involved with sending arms across the border. And this is kind of exasperating to American interlocutors who know very well that it is going across the border. So you have this kind of, how do you move on this?